news briefing organized by Ethnic Media Services and Nakatomi and Associates. I'm Sunita Sarabji. I'm a contributing editor of Ethnic Media Services and your moderator for today. The focus of today's briefing is a 33-year-old Hmong activist, Zerg Xiang, who begins the third week of a hunger strike following the fatal shooting of a Hmong farmer Sublij by law enforcement officers. We welcome all the speakers at today's briefing, activists, Hmong activists, members of the California State Legislature, local city councilwoman May Vang. Welcome to all. We will start today's call with Assemblymember David Chu, who represents San Francisco. Welcome, Assemblymember Chu.
Thank you, Nita. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me just start by saying that we are all gathered here today to make sure that the death of Mr. Howe is not forgotten. And let me start by just saying that our hearts and prayers go out to his family. Certainly as a father myself, our hearts go out to the extended family of this father of three. And I also want to just thank the community leaders who've been leading the charge on this effort. In particular, I want to thank Mr. Zerg Xiang, who we'll be hearing from shortly, for the incredible sacrifice that you are making to highlight this situation. And I also want to thank my friend, Sacramento City Council member Mai Vang, as well as other Hmong elected officials from around the country for supporting the community in Siskiyou and demanding justice. So I'm here as the immediate past chair and as a current member of the California API Legislative Caucus. I'm here to stand in solidarity with our Hmong community and to let you know that we are in this fight together. As a former criminal prosecutor and civil rights attorney, I believe that an independent investigation into how and why this death occurred is wholly appropriate. A human being lost his life, and we all deserve to know why. It seems that there is a fundamentally broken relationship between the Hmong community in Siskiyou County and the law enforcement officers sworn to protect them. And we know that this happens when law enforcement does not have a connection or an understanding of the communities that they serve. As we saw with the most previous United States president, we know that hate for Asian Americans can come from even the highest levels of government and authority. And unfortunately, in recent weeks, many of us believe we have seen a pattern of discrimination from some local officials in California. And as everyone on this call knows, this is unfortunately one example in a nationwide pattern of hate and hostility and violence toward our Asian American community. This is something that our API Legislative Caucus has taken very seriously and has been working on since the beginning of this pandemic. I was asked to take a few moments to describe just this past week. There was a historic and unprecedented inclusion of $156 million in our state budget to combat anti-API hate and violence. And for representatives of the ethnic media, we want to make sure we highlight this for you. 2/3 of this budget will be focused on victims and prevention, $110 million over the next 3 years to go to nonprofits doing incredibly important work to make sure that our state is providing culturally competent, language accessible, comprehensive services to victims, as well as support for those doing innovative work to prevent attacks, public escort programs, conflict resolution programs, and others. A portion of this budget will focus on data equity and monitoring. From the beginning of the spike of anti-Asian violence, there's an organization that you'll hear from later today that has documented thousands of incidents, and we're going to be investing money to make sure this work continues, as well as to invest in a regular survey of the needs and barriers facing the diversity of our API community around California, and that includes particularly the Hmong community. Our package also focuses on safe schools for API kids to fund anti-bias work in our K-12 system, as well as in the higher ed system. And I want to also just thank the ethnic media. We've included $10 million for ethnic media outreach to make sure that our diverse communities know about what we're doing. and are able to partner with the ethnic media as trusted language accessible messengers for this information. Let me just close by saying we need justice for the family of Mr. Howe, for the Hmong community, for Californians. We stand with you during these dark days. We need answers, and we look forward to hearing from officials in Siskiyou County on what they're planning to do, and we'll continue to monitor this situation as it continues. With that, I'll turn it back over to Sunita.
Assemblymember Chu, has the Asian Pacific Islander Legislative Caucus reached out to Siskiyou County, the Sheriff's Department, or to the DA's office? And how do you plan to move forward with this?
So this just came to my attention in the last few days, and we are actually in our legislative recess. So our caucus, we actually have not convened since this incident came to our attention, but I'll certainly be discussing it with our colleagues, and I know we'll stand with community during this time period.
Absolutely. A follow-up question. Do you plan to ask the Justice Department to investigate this case, as many members of the community have asked for?
Well, as I stated earlier, I think that's appropriate. That's my perspective. I believe, we'll see what our caucus thinks, but I suspect that they will agree. It is a former member of the API Legislative Caucus, former Assemblymember Rob Bonta, who is now the Attorney General. Mr. Bonta and I both co-authored the law of California today that there be independent investigations involving when local law enforcement are involved in a police shooting of a Californian. I think that's appropriate here, particularly given how many questions and concerns have been raised thus far and the suggestions of some within law enforcement around this case. I think to get more certainty and answers, I think all of us throughout California, but particularly in the local community, would think that it'd be more appropriate if the Attorney General were to do an independent investigation of this situation.
Absolutely. One final question. Is there a possibility for the legislature to intervene and counter local laws that restrict water transportation? In this case, it's no more than 100 gallons of water that can be transported through certain areas of Siskiyou County. And I wonder if the state legislature plans to intervene in local county laws.
So I was just apprised of those facts. It was not something I had heard about before, certainly very troubling. Again, because we are in our legislative recess, I've not had a chance to discuss this further with other colleagues, but certainly the situation is very troubling, and there are answers that we want to know from local officials as to why the necessity for this. So I think this, on these issues, stay tuned.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time.
Of course, thank you. And again, my hearts and prayers to the community. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We will next hear from Zerg Zhang, who is on his 18th day of a hunger strike in support of Mr. Hodge. Zerg, I want to lead off this portion of the briefing with asking you just how you're feeling at this point. You've been on, I believe, just water and Gatorade, is that right?
Just water and a little bit of Pedialyte to sustain my electrolytes in this heat so that I obviously don't collapse and die within a few days. In terms of how I feel, the body is definitely deteriorating by the minute. The mind is still very sharp, still very cognizant, still very determined. But as you all know, without the body, the mind also suffers. So, and the deterioration is happening exponentially. It's not, a little bit here and there. It's a little here and then a lot there. So I'm getting there to that point. Absolutely.
Did you want to begin with a few opening remarks before we open the call up to reporters?
Sure. Just that I'm doing this just for transparency and for justice. You know, it's the like you all said, the relationship is broken, the trust is gone. So the only way that they can repair that trust is by saying we have nothing to hide. We want an independent investigation to prove that we can rebuild this relationship between the law enforcement, the local government, and our community.
Absolutely. What made you decide to embark on this hunger strike and to keep it going for as long as you have?
Just because we tried everything else. You know, we've tried protesting, we tried making phone calls, we tried everything, and we've been ignored. We've been ignored, and we've been lied about. Even as we fought the lava fire in our own private property, they lied about us, lied about what we were doing. So I knew the only way that we could get a platform was a platform that people would pay attention to. And I knew that times were extreme and desperate. So that I went to embark on this desperate measure. And I wanted to show them how serious we were by continuing this until I absolutely have to the point of coma, death, whatever. It's
A non-violent.
yeah, and it's completely non-violent to show them just how infactual their demonization of us actually was. So that's why I decided to do this.
Absolutely. Jaya Padmanabhan asked a really interesting question. Jaya asked, what would make you end your hunger strike, Mr. Zhang?
The independent investigation, the release of all video evidence of the shooting so that we can have a definitive answer as to what happened, as to the truth. Like we said, if the evidence, the video evidence and the investigation, independent investigation corroborates the officer's account, then we would accept that. And then we would mourn it as a terrible tragedy, as a terrible mistake. And we would thank the law enforcement officers for doing the best they could. But if the investigation turns out that it was a lie, that it was a gross negligent cover-up, then we would demand justice.
Absolutely. Fatma Bakit asked a question. Fatma, would you like to ask your question?
Just a second, because I'm also sharing a live with the ethnic media. Let me turn it off. Yeah, my question, my question is, as you know, back home, a lot of Palestinian, a lot of people, they make a hunger strike, and nobody contact them, or nobody talk to them or ask about them. As we hear and as we see, this is a free country, and you making this hunger strike. Did anyone from the Congress, from the official people, from the mayor contact you and ask you about this hunger strike? And how about if nobody contact you and you know, at least give the baseline with what you ask to stop your hunger strike? You're gonna continue doing it?
Yes, I'll continue doing it. We had State Senator Fong Kerr from Minnesota call me directly to ask how I was, to see my progress in terms of local government. We also had former Mayor Steve Lee. He came in to address this issue, and his primary concern was my health. So I thank him for that. In terms of local governments, it was actually former Mayor Steve Lee who convinced Sheriff LaRue to come have a discussion with us. A county supervisor, his name was Ed Valenzuela. He came and had a discussion, but only after repeated phone calls inundated his office to tell him to actually come and discuss things with me. They even said that they walk past me every day, but they don't come and talk to me. They don't acknowledge me. I'm pretty much like how you mentioned, how people don't pay attention. That's exactly what was going on here. No attention was paid. I believe they probably suspected that I would give up. And here I am, day 18, with no intention of giving up until we seek justice and we find justice and the truth.
Absolutely. Next, Julia Dudley would like to ask a question? Julia?
Sure.
Oh, you're muted.
How about now?
There you
Yeah.
go. Yes.
Thank you. I applaud you on being able to stay strong during such a difficult time. And coming from the stance of the African American community, we certainly feel your plight and understand. But I know that's probably something that members of our community have never thought of as far as doing a hunger strike, maybe a little bit different. We'll protest and we'll do other things. What was the finality that led you to say, I have to do this hunger strike? I have to educate people. And furthermore, what do you want us to know? The outside people looking in, what do we absolutely need to know and understand? Thank
Great
you.
question.
To show us that most of us and most of humankind are peaceful people, are people who want to live, to have liberty, to have freedom. I was at the George Floyd protest, and I saw provocators, destroy buildings to incite hate towards the movement when we knew that it wasn't the case, and I wanted to give the people here who have been treating us as inhumane one final shot to say, hey, we do want a peaceful resolution. We do care as a people to say you hurt, but you do so in a peaceful way. And they haven't given any indication that they care about the peaceful way. And we sort of knew that. We hoped that that wouldn't be the case. But as we saw, especially with the African American community who's been trying for hundreds of years to do it the right way, to do it the peaceful way, nobody cared until it got to the point where they said, okay, this will ruin everything. But they only care about attention when it's of a pyrrhic nature. So I said, okay, if you want a violent resolution, I will do violence onto myself first. And if you don't care, then what other steps do we have? Just like the African American community, what other steps do we have? And we all know the answer to that.
A couple more questions. Have you heard from law enforcement at all on your demands? And can you tell us a little bit more about what law enforcement has actually told you about the shooting of Mr. Hodge?
They, the DA here, DA Andrews, he specifically said that he doesn't care that I'm going without food. They won't hand this over to the FBI. He says that he believes there's video footage of the shooting incident. Local law enforcement, they asked me, what did it take to end my hunger strike? I told them my demands have been the same. Release the evidence, the body cams, the vehicle cams, have a third-party investigation so that you can prove that you are who you say you are. You are respectable people. Your local government here is to protect everybody. And I've been met with delays. I've been met with, rumors, excuses. And that's probably been like about a week now since we've had those discussions. So the lack of, the profound indifference towards my hunger strike by local law enforcement and local government is just a microcosm of what our community has been dealing with for a few years now.
Absolutely. Keegan Hamilton would like to ask a question. Keegan?
Yeah, hi. Thank you for doing this. My question is sort of how did it get to this point? How did relations between the Hmong and the law enforcement, the general community in Siskiyou County reach this breaking point? And is your focus of this protest the shooting, or is the water law also a part of your action here?
Well, I believe it started escalating when Jeremiah LaRue took office as sheriff. And then, he's quoted as saying, go after the water. And then ever since then, the shooting, like I've said previously, is the culmination of the escalation of tensions between local law enforcement, local government, and the surrounding community against our community. They've been galvanizing the community against us. They've been calling us cartel, mafia, buzzwords, dog whistles to inhumanize, dehumanize us, demonize us, and we haven't had a voice to fight back. You know, nobody in this county has allowed us to have a voice. It's always the government saying this, and then people listen to that because that's the only side of the story. And then we've had actual threats of mass arson and domestic terrorism against us, right on the sheriff's Facebook pages, right on county government pages, to the fact that they believed it was legal to commit mass arson against our private properties because they're so emboldened by what the local government has been telling them about us. They've been attacking businesses that service us. People come and sell firewood to our community. The local law enforcement says you're no longer allowed to go sell anything to them. Some of our people have gone to businesses and they say, the police, they said we can't sell to you Asians anymore. Things of that nature where the entire community has been mobilized against us. Businesses have been mobilized against us. And it's very sad because a lot of the people in the county understand that they absolutely depend on the money that we bring to this community. One of the county supervisors even said the local gas station, local lumber or hardware store, Mayton, that we primarily go to, is top 10 for businesses for generating tax revenue for the entire county. Imagine that, a gas station for the entire county. And now it's nothing because we determined to fight their tyrannical government overreach with a boycott, and it's affecting them for the past 2 months. You know, the sheriff, they're promoting hate groups, and they're promoting libel and slander right on their Facebook page. They just shared a Facebook page from a group called Hmong Conservatives, just denouncing what I'm doing and trying to twist and manipulate the issues here. And the sheriff is a government entity, so you can go on to the Siskiyou County Sheriff's page, see what they shared, and you'll be aghast at what the government here is actually trying to portray us as.
Mr. Zhang, thank you so much for your comments. I'm going to turn it over to your colleague, Tong Zhang. Tong, would you like to start out with a few introductory remarks about why you're here and why you are mobilizing around the shooting of Mr. Hodge?
Well, in the past recent years, when LaRue has been taken over, appointed as taken over the chair, he has been promoting racism, hatred towards the Asian community here in Siskiyou. Not long when he took in office, he did swear an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States. But without doing that, he's only holding to certain people and not his whole community. Now, with all the violence that he's been promoting, saying that all these Asian cartels, labeling us, Asian cartel, Asian mafia, coming out as soon as this water ordinance came out to the newspaper. Not 2 hours later, they came out and start enforcing the law on driving away the water trucks that was on private roads, not even on county roads, on private roads. They do unlawful investigation on there. I did talk to actually talked to one of the sergeants that was doing the investigation. He told me he was doing investigation on private property on those water trucks, and he threatened me if I don't stop, he's gonna arrest me. I told him, go ahead, I did nothing wrong. This is private property. Unless you have proper paperwork, you can go ahead and leave and stop harassing this Asian community. He put his hand on his gun. The only thing that I have on me was my camera. I was taking videos. I saw him put his hand on his pistol. And so it only takes a split second to do something with that. And I did call him out on that. I only have my cell phone. I'm unarmed. are you going to shoot me? Okay, just to put it on my video for my own protections. Now, other than that, there is right as soon as that ordinance came into place, there was a post going around and stated that, if cutting the Asian water does not drive them out of our area, there is not illegal to burn us out, and that's exactly what happened with the lava fire. Is to burn us out. Now, and during the lava fire, there's a lot of things that happen. They paint us as North Korea, as a communist. Okay, they put signs in front of our entrance. The only one that has access to those entrance at the time was just the local law enforcement. Okay, Cal Fire and National Forest. Okay, none of the resident are able to actually get in front of those entrance. We have video surfacing on that the white community can go ahead and get food supply to the barricade, but Asian community cannot get food supplied to the barricade and come out and grab those. There are kids as young as 2 years old that are going out without milk and without food and water. So he has to take those kids out of the area and can't come back in due to that situation. But the white community can go ahead and drop food off at the barricade, and they can come and get it from the blockade to go back home. Now, these are some of the things that it's affected to us, and we want to make something. We try protesting peacefully. We tried pretty much everything that we could, phone calls, spreading the words, all the lies, trying to explain to everyone, the locals that knows us, they know that we're peaceful people, we're peaceful community, and we help the community out. We did do a fundraiser and donated a fire truck to Cal Fire here in this county. Also, we did a fundraiser and supported the Siskiyou School Board. Okay, so these are some of the small things that we did here in the community. But then with the when LaRue took office, with all that promotion, they put it right on the share page. Now, a couple of days ago, they went in and deleted everything, clear everything off. Everything that's now on there, it's just specific, just about the fire and what he just put it on there yesterday. The final draw on this was the killing of our Hmong brothers. Okay, we think anyone. I'm a father. Okay, if I was going to go and escort my family out, I would not do anything stupid to endanger my family that's behind me, especially when I'm trying to run away from a fire. Now, what got us to think that there's a lot of cover in this is because there was a family member say that his dog, their family dog, their pet Silk, was actually in the vehicle with Sean Lane her, and it was possible that he got shot and taken away by animal control. Now, that wasn't even on the newspaper or any news at all from the local government or from the sheriff's department. Those are all covered up. They don't want no one to know that there was a dog in there involved in the shooting as well. So what else are they covering? That's why it draws the line when we say enough is enough, and we want justice. We want the AG to come up here, do an external investigation to where this is not biased. We think the government here, local, the local law enforcement here are so biased to where we don't trust them no more. So we want outsiders to come in and do that investigation.
Thank you. And I understand that your attorney, Nancy Lee, is also on the call. Nancy, I wanted to ask you what it's going to take to get the Justice Department to investigate it, as some members of the community have asked for.
Yeah, and I think Councilmember Mai, who's on here also, she could probably better answer that later. But what we're really trying to do is get community support, right? We want to make our voices loud because as y'all heard, that is one of Zerg's main requests. And, he has said publicly and clearly that he's not leaving until his demand that there's a independent investigation has been met. So we are pushing that on the grassroots level. There are organizers working on the ground doing it. Then also just folks behind the scene who know the AG, who are trying to contact him in his office to get them involved. At this point, we just want to know, will there be an investigation? And if not, then, let us know. Because as you all can see, Zerg, to put it bluntly, is dying, right? I mean, I just saw Zerg in person 2 days ago. And so to see him now on video, to see the deterioration, because he's a very smart, bright man. You all can see that. But, just 2 days ago, I mean, we're talking about night and day in terms of what's happening with his health. So as his attorney, I want to make sure that his rights are being respected out there. He is very vulnerable. He's out in the open. And for those who are not familiar with Siskiyou County, we're talking about temperatures in the 90s and 100s, right? So it is hot out there. So we're just making sure that, first of all, that nobody's harassing him. And second of all, being his representative, hopefully trying to get a dialogue going with the county officials. I will say that I am a former deputy public defender. And so I have worked with a lot of different law enforcement agencies, a lot of DA offices. And this is one of these places where even I'm shaking my head, right? I've seen it all. And I'm just flabbergasted by the treatment of the Hmong and also just their response to what is happening up there, really just turning a blind eye, not even, as much as giving this a second thought. And those comments are very public from the DA and from the sheriff regarding what they think about what's going on, right? And we're not even talking about a legal level, just on a very human level to acknowledge what Zerg is doing. So I'm gonna go ahead and also put my information in the chat so you all have it. Zerg his health is declining every minute. And so what we're trying to do is also have him conserve his energy. So if you all have any questions, what I would request is that you guys email me and then I'll go ahead and farm those over to Zerg.
Nancy, just a very basic question. I wonder if at any point law enforcement can step in and force feed Mr. Zhang. Is that a possibility at all?
So that is something that we are looking into. All the case law has to do with prison hunger strikes, right? And because when you're in prison, the government has a special duty to to take care of you, and so they can force feed you in prison. I am talking with other attorneys who have more expertise in that area to make sure that Zerg's rights are being respected in terms of whether or not they can force feed him or kick him out from that area. At this point, we don't think they can do that in terms of force feeding him. He does have he does have capacity to right now to say no to that. But obviously his health is deteriorating, and that's something that we would have to consider and do further research on. But we hope we don't get there, right? We hope that that folks step up and do what's right, and that we don't get to the point where Zerg, that decision has to be made, or even if death is not the end result here, that he doesn't walk away with his capacities diminished, right, physically or intellectually and cognitively. So that is our concern right now.
Absolutely. Two more questions for Tong before we move on to Council Member Vang. Peter Sherman has a question. Peter?
Hi, thank you. I was just wondering whether the tensions that exist in the community have been specifically exacerbated by the drought and fire, or whether these tensions were already there even before the drought, and the drought just made them that much more acute. Thank you.
Now the drought has always been here. The tension itself was actually escalated when LaRue took in office. The tension between the Asian community and law enforcement and the community itself was due to all the violence or all the promotions that LaRue has been posted on his Facebook page, on the sheriff page, on Facebook and social media, coming out of his own, doing public speak. Now, these are all the things that LaRue has been doing ever since he's been taken in office. Now, here's a new threat that just came out. I don't know whether it's true or who to follow with or what's going on, but as of today, earlier this morning, there was a new threat stating that there is a group of white supremacists that are coming to this area targeting Asian and going to shoot them out. I'm not sure where it came from, but I have a couple guys looking into that matter to see, if there's any posts anywhere or anything due to, because one of the posts that was in the past that they did post it up, they do have a dark web with only access code that can get into that dark web. And again, this is, something that it's, we do think that the board of supervisors involved in this, the sheriff is involved, and the DA is also involved in this. I did talk with, I did went to one of their Patriot meeting. It's a Siskiyou Patriot meeting, and the board of supervisor chairman was there. The DA was there. We have a couple individuals that were in there claiming and also explaining to telling the DA himself, stating that they went into the private property, broke into the private lot, taking pictures, videos, and things like that. Now the DA, instead of telling them that's a bad thing to do, that's trespassing, you guys can't do that, he applauded them for the job well done that they did. I did also ask. I also asked the board of supervisor chairman on regards to their new water ordinance about the 100 gallons to see if there's a solution to it, to where if there's a water system or public system to where the community can get their 100 gallons from, because right after that's passed, sheriff department actually came out with a threat stating that anyone who assists the Asian community are subject up to $2,500. Okay, and so that scares people from giving us that. And when I asked the chairman that, he goes, no, he doesn't have a system. He doesn't have anything. Maybe the DA might know of some source. The DA also said they don't know anything. So that is, to me, you're pretty much putting something in the process without thinking of a solution into a law. That's just pretty much targeting just the Asian community. Now there is a area here that's open to the public, that to the white community, that they can get their water from, and we've seen it. We have pictures. It's just that it's close to the Asian community.
Absolutely.
So that's what got to where we are today.
Mr. Chong, thank you so much for your remarks. We have so many other questions that we want to ask of both of you, but we're going to move along to Sacramento Council Member Mai Vang. Welcome. Ms. Vang, are you on the call?
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
can.
thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us.
No, thank you so much for covering this really important and urgent matter. I think when we say time is of the essence, we mean every second and every moment, given that Zur is now officially on day 19th of his hunger strike. Let me just say first, I'm incredibly proud of the great work that our local organizers are doing on the ground in Tong, but also want to give a shout out to our community activist, Thunza Shong, who's actually joining us here today as well, to seek justice and ask for an independent investigation. I think many of us know, we've heard from Zur, we've heard from Tong as well, that Shongling Gaoher's tragic murder, the father of three, that his murder and his death can't be separated from the discriminatory policies and racist practices that's been happening over the years in this county, and specifically by Siskiyou County Board of Supervisors and their Sheriff's Department. Our communities know too well, and I've shared this over and over again, how the system continues to be stacked against minorities, against Hmong and Asian American communities. A couple years ago, there was a news stories regarding voter intimidation in this county. And now you have heard from Tong and organizers about the discriminatory water policy. And all of this have really led to the tragic death of our Hmong brother, Shonglin Gao and I'll continue to say his name, by the hand of law enforcement. All of this is connected and you can't separate it. I think it's also really important to point out.
Ms. Vang, I'm so sorry, but our interpreter asked if you could just slow down a bit. We're simultaneously interpreting this in 3 different languages. So if you could just slow it down a bit. Thank you.
Absolutely. So as I was saying is that the death of Shonglin Gao cannot be separated from the discriminatory practices and the racist, the racial profiling that we've seen over and over again in Siskiyou County. And I've heard firsthand from our elders, from Hmong families and Asian American residents about just the injustice in this county. I also want to share, I think the big elephant in the room is around cannabis as well. And I want to share directly that we must be very careful and not fall into the narrative of criminalizing our community as a way to justify racist policy and racial profiling, but particularly the loss of life. That is really important. And I also want to emphasize that we know that there are disproportionate impacts of cannabis enforcement on permitting on Black, Latino, Southeast Asian, and communities of color, not just in this county, but in this state and in this country. And so it's really important for folks to understand that. I have shared again that the discriminatory action in Siskiyou is not something that is new and has occurred without any accountability or oversight. And that's what you're hearing from Zur and the organizers on the ground, is that they do not trust local electeds. They do not trust the sheriff's department and the DA to actually carry out this investigation. And the fact that the DA was quoted in a recent news that he's going to do his due diligence, but right after that, he said he doesn't see any alleged discrimination. That's bias, right? That the fact that he's going to do his due diligence, but already stating that he doesn't see any alleged racism going on, is a red flag for all of us. And so I am, along with Councilwoman Sheng Tao from the city of Oakland, Trustee Brandon Vang from Sanger, and also Trustee Sean Yang from Elk Grove Unified. The 4 of us actually signed a letter requesting the Attorney General to actually look at the situation, at the officer-involved shooting, and also look at the racist practice and racial profiling that's been happening in this county. I think for me, this is a human rights concern, right? To cut water from an entire community where our elders and our families and our children live, work, and play is an injustice. We've seen this happening in Indigenous community across the country. I mean, to exclude people from protection and resources like fire services, even in the homes and property in which Hmong and Asian American communities own, is an injustice. We've seen this in our vulnerable communities. And lastly, we've seen this over and over again in our Black and Brown communities, right? To justify a killing and to justify racist policy by criminalizing an entire community. This is what you're seeing happening in Siskiyou. And so I am incredibly concerned and will do everything I can within my power, even though Siskiyou is not in my jurisdiction. I am a city council member in Sacramento, but I am also a Hmong daughter, and I care deeply about all of our communities. And this is an injustice that's happening, and folks need to pay very close attention. I will also say, when I think about the capacity in Siskiyou, we have an Asian American community there, a Hmong community there. And, from what I've gathered is that there's been zero investment up there to really also invest in this community. And so if you are listening, this is also very important. And when we talk about community investment, this community, this Hmong and Asian American community in Siskiyou needs your support, needs your help. And right now, the short term is the call to action, right? Zur is on day 19th, and I'm going to keep saying it, as a hunger strike. I myself have told him, Zur, you already have done so much. You, in so many ways, have already won because you are bringing attention to this issue. And he said, no, council member, I'm not going to stop until justice is served. Right. And I commend him, but I am incredibly concerned about his health every single day and minute. It is a life and death situation, and I'm really hoping that we can get some attention, some urgency, and get justice, the justice that this community deserve and has been fighting for over the years.
Councilmember Dang, I wanted to ask you, farmer or people in the area are allowed to only transport 100 gallons of water at a time, under 100 gallons of water at a time. And the average person uses about 124 gallons of water per day. So it seems like we're denying people a basic human right of water. Can you comment a little bit on that? And specifically on the fact that these sanctions are in the neighborhoods where the Hmong community live and not in other neighborhoods.
Yeah, Sunita, I think I think your question itself is a statement, right? Like, we know that water is a right, and we're seeing water being denied to families, to children, to folks who live in this area. And what you're also seeing, what I've heard firsthand from Ground Zero, is if you look Asian, you get pulled over completely, right? To see what's in your car, right? Your truck, how much water you're carrying, right? That in itself is racial profiling. That is happening right now in the state of California, in Siskiyou County. And this is the reason why organizers on the ground, and Zur in particular, do not trust the local government, the sheriff, and the DA's office, right? That they're all very connected. And we need someone independent to come in, and the people's attorney, right? Rob Bonta, we need him to look into this case and the situation. It is dire, and this community has been asking for justice. And we are at a pivotal point in this moment right now where law enforcement has killed one of our Hmong brothers. And it's not an incident that happened in siloed. It is accumulation of the racial tension, the racial profiling, the discriminatory policies that's been targeted at Hmong and Asian American residents. There's also a Chinese community up there as well, right? And so, you know, even we've seen articles from Republican from Congress, from local state assembly in Siskiyou that has a very harmful narrative about Hmong and Asian Americans, right? What you're seeing is the criminalization of an entire community to justify the racist policy. And we need to make sure that that stops. And we need to ensure that this community gets the justice that they rightfully deserved.
Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your presence here.
Absolutely, thank you.
And we move on next to longtime community advocate and activist Helen Zia. Helen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sunita, and everybody on the call. This is such an important issue, and it's inspiring, and to just see how much protest and actions are going on the ground, and to listen to all of the speakers here, and to hear about the outrageous things that are going on in Siskiyou County. As Sunita said, I've been a longtime activist as well as a journalist tracking Asian American communities and anti-Asian violence for the last 40 years. So I just wanted to share some 3 observations from my experiences in those times, as well as some examples. And these observations, you know, relate directly to the high potential for bias and mishandling in the investigation of the police killing of Mr. Her. So my first observation is that Asian Americans have long been rendered invisible by our public officials, political leaders, educational system, as well as the criminal justice system, which has made it possible for injustice and racism to take place without any accountability at all. The Hmong American community and other highly marginalized communities within our AAPI designation are especially invisible and vulnerable to this kind of abuse. My second observation is that it is critical to have an independent investigation with oversight from the State Attorney General's office, as well as those who are familiar with Asian American Pacific Islander concerns, because our communities have been historically demonized by police, as we see what's going on now in Siskiyou County, and falsely assumed to be so many things: illegal, deviant, criminal, and therefore targeted by law enforcement from local as well as to federal levels. There are too many examples of that where the AAPI community has needed assistance and the justice system has failed us. or has even used deadly force against the Asian American community, as with this heinous police killing of Mr. He. My third observation is that in cases of egregious injustice, we have had numerous historical experiences where the police, the justice system, the courts, the government, and oftentimes the media has ignored and overlooked our Asian American communities. And this discounting of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders not only allows for such systemic biases to continue unchallenged, but in addition, that lack of public awareness means that our Asian American communities actually have to pass a higher bar to show discrimination has taken place. And this is part of the racism that Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders experience, and this is wrong. So I also just wanted to cite a few historical examples of these. There are many other examples to give, but I'll cite a few. In 1982, Vincent Chin, a 27-year-old Chinese American, was killed by two white men in a hate crime. The police never interviewed eyewitnesses, and the judge sentenced the two white killers to probation for beating Vincent Chin to death with a baseball bat. Even though witnesses heard the killers say, "It's because of you mother Fs that we're out of work," and then hired a man to hunt Vincent Chin down and said, "Let's get the Chinese." This was not considered to be racially motivated. Why? Because of that higher bar that, well, if you look at those words, no racial slurs that are commonly recognized were used. In 1989 in Stockton at an elementary school that was largely Southeast Asian refugee children, a mass killer killed 5 of the children and dozens others were wounded, and the police chief immediately dismissed the question of racism. On the most important nightly newscast that night, Nightline, the anchor, Ted Koppel, never questioned whether racism was a factor. And it was only after Asian American communities demanded that the Attorney General investigate, the AG's office found that the killer had a history of white supremacy and that he hated Asians. So this was only after an independent review. In 1997, in the suburban town of Rohnert Park, a Chinese American scientist named Quan Jung Cao was shouting on his own front lawn late at night, waving a stick. Police arrived to investigate and within seconds shot him to death from their car, claiming that he was waving the stick martial arts style. And in spite of community protests, no police were charged at all in that killing. In 2003, the San Jose police shot and killed Cao Bích Tran, a Vietnamese woman, within seconds of arriving at her apartment because she was waving a vegetable peeler. And mass protests followed there, but no police were charged. In 2006, in Minneapolis, Phong Le, a 19-year-old Hmong American man, was shot 8 times and killed by Minneapolis police, who claimed that he was armed, which the family disputed. And in spite of community protests, the police officer was exonerated. And I'd like to just note that Phong Le's mother, Yo Vang, publicly spoke out in support of Black Lives Matter in 2020 after the police murder of George Floyd. One more example, in 2020, after a white mass killer hunted down and killed 8 Asian American women in Atlanta, the sheriff immediately discounted any racial animus by the killer, saying that the killer was simply having a bad day. So reminiscent of the police captain's immediate response in the Stockton killings that had taken place 31 years earlier. So these are just examples. There are too many more of them of how attacks and injustice against our Asian American and Pacific Islander communities are not taken seriously by the justice system, especially those committed by law enforcement officers themselves. So I'm here today to say that there should be no more harassment of the Hmong community, and there should be justice for Mr. He and his family. The AG's office must investigate. We know from all of these examples and this long history that there must be an independent investigation And any police body video cams and any other evidence must be made public immediately. Thank you.
Ellen, I'd like to start off with a question for you. Historically, police have never been charged with hate crimes in these types of shootings. And you noticed that most recently with the George Floyd case. I wonder if you could comment on that.
Well, the people who are on the ground making the decision to prosecute, they have been subject, to the same poisons and racism and views of communities, including racist views of communities themselves. We're seeing, for example, in the investigations of what happened on January 6th in the insurrection to take over the Congress and disrupt this democracy, that there were law enforcement officials who were part of that insurrection. And unfortunately, we know that, for example, in the cases of Asian Americans who have been attacked or in things that anybody looking at the facts would say a person was singled out because they were Asian. That especially when there is a white perpetrator, police on the ground will say, oh, this has nothing to do with race, without any investigation at all. And they are the ones who make the determination of what kind of prosecution takes place. And that is really where the problem begins, right on the ground.
Absolutely. Helen, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your presence here. Our last speaker is Manju Kulkarni. She's the co-founder of Stop AAPI Hate. Manju, welcome.
Thank you so much, Sunita. And I want to also thank Sandy and Deborah for organizing this important event and inviting me to participate. First off, I want to express my sincere condolences to the family of Mr. Howe. It was such a horrific incident and killing, and we really need to get to the bottom of this, as so many of our speakers today have said. I also want to express my gratitude to Zhe Zhang for his courage and his personal sacrifice. And alongside that too, of the leadership we've seen from Councilmember Vang, from Assemblymember Chu, and also want to thank Helen for her years of leadership in our communities. And just this morning, there is a Time magazine essay that she wrote about the resilience of our communities, and I direct everyone to read that. So, as Helen pointed out, unfortunately, this is not the first time our communities have experienced this type of hate, and even at the hands sometimes of law enforcement. And when I say communities, I mean that very broadly. Growing up myself in Montgomery, Alabama, I know all too well when law enforcement alongside white supremacists have targeted African-American sisters and brothers. We know this year, it is the 100-year anniversary of the Tulsa massacre, where again, individuals came after communities of color and Black Americans, and really it destroyed their lives and their livelihoods. And in the AAPI community too, in 1907, 500 white individuals, not that far from Siskiyou County, drove out 200 South Asian American men, beating them simply because they were working in a lumber yard, simply because they were feeding their families. So it is because of this that we created APCON, my organization, alongside Chinese for Affirmative Action and San Francisco State University. We created Stop AAPI Hate because we knew how important it was to document these incidents, to provide resources and assistance to community members, and to really drive policy decisions. And so I think that's what today's event is about. In May, we released a report, a national report that found that Asian Americans had experienced and reported to us 6,600 incident reports, which we know to just be the tip of the iceberg, because the Pew Research Center has said that 45% of our community members nationwide, 8 to 10 million people, have experienced some form of hate or discrimination in just the last year. In California, that number of 6,600 translates to 40% or 2,600. And so it's so important that our elected leaders take action. What we've seen at Stop AAPI Hate is incidents of verbal harassment, physical assault, civil rights violations, and of course, the worst is the Atlanta shooting. And I point out what happened in Atlanta because there too, we saw law enforcement initially making inappropriate statements. The police officer in charge said at a press conference the next day that it wasn't a racist act because the perpetrator said it wasn't. It was because of sexual addiction or because he had a bad day. We don't need law enforcement to act as defense attorneys for white supremacists. And that's what's happening every single day. By the way, we also know that that particular officer sold on his Facebook page t-shirts that said China virus. So we can't have these individuals working supposedly on our behalf. We know that there's interpersonal racism, but we know that there's absolutely institutional racism in our communities. And Zur and Tong really captured this so vividly in terms of their experiences in Siskiyou County. So I want to just say in closing that we absolutely at Stop AAPI Hate stand with the Hmong community of Siskiyou County and really our AAPI sisters and brothers across California and the nation. We must have the information released. We must have an independent investigation. And we need to get to the bottom of this, as I said, and that time is now. We can't wait any longer, and our friend and brother, Mr. Zhang, can't wait. His life is at risk, and so this needs to happen today. Thank you.
Manju, have you seen the larger AAPI community becoming involved in this case?
You know, obviously things happen very quickly, and I think it's because of events like today that we are able to get the word out. And when I say we, I mean, again, folks like Deborah, Sandy, you all, and our council members like Council Member Vang, our other local leaders, and the Hmong community. They have done an amazing job of highlighting this issue. And I think and I hope that we are now going to see action after today's press conference, that this has been highlighted to the highest levels. And so by Monday, we need to see our Attorney General make decisions that advocate for the release of information and for independent investigations.
Manju, thank you so much for joining us today. I wanted to conclude with a last word from Mr. Gir. Could you please tell us what you would like to see happening next? Mr. Gir?
You talking to Zur?
Yes, absolutely. Mr.
Okay.
Gir,
Okay, sorry.
We've had this press conference today. What would you like? Could you give us a call to action?
Yes, I would like the entire, not just the Asian American community, but all communities who deal with this sort of government oppression, this government mandated violence, to come together and say, we want answers. We've given the government a monopoly on the violence in this country, but we also demand that they use it with the utmost respect, with as the last resort. And when it does happen, we want complete transparency. So I would like everybody to come here and say, we want answers, because if this can happen to you there in Siskiyou County, to the Hmong community, it can happen to all our communities. I'm sorry, did that answer the question? I'm kind of
Yes,
I'm a little drained right
absolutely.
now.
Absolutely. And thank you so much. Our hearts go out to you. We would like to conclude with Tu Ger, who has been actively involved in Zerg's case. Mr. Ger, could you share some final remarks?
Hello, you can hear me?
Yes, we
All
can.
right, thank you. Thank you for having me on. Thank you all for being here. This is such a critical time for our community. I just want to set the backdrop. I actually spent a week in Siskiyou County and was one of the key organizers of last week's protest, where over 800 people from all walks of life came. And we were able to do that within a short span of a few days, just because, again, time is of the essence. We've changed the narrative. 18 days ago, Brother Zerg went on a hunger strike. We're 18, 19 days in, and I'm not a health expert, but right between 18 and 21 days, this is when the body starts to break down. Vital organs can fail and have permanent damage. And the narrative is Zerg is slowly dying. And so the idea that folks are, oh, we'll get back to each other and all that. And so when we were down there, I saw, again, we tried to talk to Zerg, and Zerg said, he's not going to stop until justice is served. So a few things that I've learned in the community in the last week is that there's a few things if folks could be aware of. There's a few movements, right? Zerg, the name Zerg Strong has been the trending hashtag. If you have seen, Zerg is the face and the leader of this movement who's really stepped up in his hunger strike. However, there's the community there as you talked about, has been experiencing, again, racial profound discrimination. So there's that piece. There's several pending legislation and lawsuits that community has with the county. And then now we have the Mr. Xiong Lang and his family, the death of Xiong Lang. So there's that. So the question I think we're as a community, we're grappling with is, what does justice look like in the short term? What does justice look like in the long term? And for Zerg, what does justice look like for him, for the community, and then also for the Mr. Hurst family? Mr. Zerg needs to stay alive. That's justice in the short term. This weekend, there's going to be another 48 to 36 hours where government closed offices will close in the next few hours. So we're not going to hear anything. And again, his leg, he mentioned he cannot feel his legs. You heard him say earlier. So in the short term, we've launched a massive media campaign to get letters to flood the Attorney General's office with letters calling for him to intervene, because Zerg said himself, unless there's an independent investigation, he will not stop, which means if it doesn't happen, he's going to die. And when that happens, the community loses. We've built up so much momentum in the past week, and we cannot lose Zerg, and we cannot lose the Zerg Strong movement. As for Mr. Hurst family, there's some things here that's happening here. Now they're working with their attorney, but they're in the dark. Now, in all my years of doing activism, there's some Sheriff LaRue in the last week, we found out Sheriff LaRue is the small fish in there. There's some higher powers that we need to that who control the cards here. And that's the district attorney, who refuses, as we learned yesterday, to recuse himself from this investigation, which if he does, which means we need to go to the Attorney General to intervene. There's no trust there. There's lots of suspicion surrounding the death of Mr. Hurd. Why did it take 16, 17 days for us to even learn the name of the deceased? The information about the dog, is the dog even alive or dead? Why isn't that being kept from the wife and the 3 kids? The attorney of Mr. Hurd, is he equipped? Again, as a community activist, I'm going to ask these tough questions. Why haven't you made a statement that there's a wife and 3 children who are surviving? They are grieving. Please respect their privacy. Nothing has said anything from the attorney of this family, which I think is, I don't know if that is intentional or incompetence or both. So as a community activist, we're concerned about that. But if the family, the wife and the 3 children of Mr. Hurd are concerned about their safety, should we be concerned for their safety as well? So there's all these short-term, long-term questions. But first and foremost, I believe that the community, a justice for the community. Now, we can't do anything about Mr. Hurd. He's dead. But with the family, the case will, the truth will come out, and we want transparency in that. That's why we need the AG involved. With regard to the investigation calling into the systemic racism or discrimination towards the Hmong community as a whole, those cases there's investigators working on the collecting evidence that will come out eventually in the trial too. But in the immediate future, we have a man who's going on 18 days, who may not make it through the weekend. So that is the first and foremost priority right now. We need to save Zerg's life, and the Attorney General holds the cards in that. So if there's anything I can tell you, that if you guys can get Echo out there, every pressure, anything we could do, because the local DA is not going to give up this case. For him to give it up is saying, listen, and I believe there's some very suspicious activity that's going on. Why the secrecy? The community, we will all have lost this battle if a press conference is held by the district attorney, Kirk Andrus, and the attorney of Mr. Hurd, when they come out in a closed door meeting and said, you know, the sheriff deputies that day, it was a stressful day. They were evacuating fire and they just had a bad day. That would have been truly, pardon my language, truly effed up. So this is what I'm telling. Thank you all for again, being a part of this conversation. There's a few long-term battles ahead, but in the immediate future, thank you. Get the word out, save Zerg's life. Zerg is too important to the movement. And Zerg Strong encompasses all of these fights. So it's all interconnected. Thank you.
Mr. Zhang, thank you so much for your remarks. And Mr. Zerg, thank you for your valiant battle. Our hearts go out to you. Thank you all for joining the call.
Thank you.